He walked into the museum, his bright red MAGA hat instantly drawing whispers and smirks. The tour guide couldn't resist mocking him in front of the group, assuming he was an easy target. But when the truth about his identity surfaced, the guide's world turned upside down. What happened next stunned everyone. The Grand Museum Hall shimmered under bright ambient lighting, illuminating a collection of priceless artifacts. The polished marble floors reflected the soft hues of the ancient displays, while visitors moved leisurely through the room, their hushed conversations blending with the faint buzz of audio guides. A Roman exhibit stood at the center, surrounded by eager tourists. Jonathan Clark, 58, a distinguished historian with neatly combed gray hair and piercing blue eyes, walked into the exhibit hall with a confident stride. His polished brown shoes clicked softly against the tiles, complementing his navy sweater, layered over a crisp white shirt and beige trousers. Resting on his head, however, was the attention-grabbing red MAGA hat, its bold white letters starkly contrasting with the subdued tones of his attire. The hat caught immediate attention, sparking whispers and side glances from nearby visitors. As Jonathan stopped to admire an intricately carved Roman helmet, a voice broke through the hum of the crowd. Nathaniel Reed, 32, the exhibit's tour guide, spotted Jonathan from across the room. Nathaniel, with his lean build, dark curly hair, and sharp brown eyes, was dressed in khaki pants and a branded museum polo. He carried himself with an air of smugness, a clipboard in one hand, and a knowing smirk plastered across his face. "Well, well," Nathaniel said loudly, drawing the attention of the nearby tour group. "It seems we've got a guest who's here to challenge history itself." His eyes darted to Jonathan's hat, the sarcasm in his tone unmistakable. The group chuckled, a few even turning to see how Jonathan would respond. Jonathan met Nathaniel's gaze with calm amusement, his face betraying no irritation. "No challenges today," he said evenly, his voice steady. "Just here to admire some history." Nathaniel's smirk widened. "Admire or rewrite?" he quipped, leaning slightly forward. "I mean, I wouldn't want you to mistake a Roman helmet for a red cap from your collection." The group erupted in laughter, their eyes now fixed on Jonathan. A woman in the front row raised her phone subtly, capturing the moment. Jonathan, unfazed, tilted his head slightly, a faint smile crossing his lips. "Well, let's hope this tour is as enlightening as you promise," he said, stepping forward to join the group with quiet confidence. The chapter ended with a subtle shift in the room's energy, the visitors now paying more attention to the dynamic between the guide and the man in the MAGA hat than to the artifacts around them. Nathaniel smirked, clearly pleased with his opening salvo, but Jonathan's unshakable demeanor left an air of anticipation hanging in the room. The group gathered around a glass case housing medieval manuscripts, their faded pages illuminated by soft museum lighting. The intricate patterns of gold leaf and vibrant pigments glowed against the aged parchment, drawing gasps of admiration. Nathaniel's voice, smooth and confident, filled the space as he delved into the history of illuminated texts. His tone, however, was laced with a sharper edge whenever his gaze flicked toward Jonathan. "These manuscripts," Nathaniel began, gesturing grandly, "were crafted by the most skilled artisans of their time. They require a certain level of literacy to truly appreciate." He cast a deliberate glance at Jonathan, his smirk barely concealed. The group chuckled, some hiding their smiles behind their hands. Jonathan, standing at the edge of the group, remained calm, his blue eyes scanning the intricate details of the manuscripts with genuine interest. The red MAGA hat on his head seemed to radiate confidence as he leaned closer to inspect the fine details. "The craftsmanship is remarkable," Jonathan said, his tone thoughtful. "The margin design suggests a 13th century Florentine influence, likely from a monastic scriptorium." Nathaniel froze mid-gesture, momentarily caught off guard. He recovered quickly, clearing his throat. "Yes, well," he replied, his tone clipped. "For those who recognize it, I suppose even a colorful worldview doesn't preclude a passing knowledge of history." A younger woman, her blonde hair tucked under a wide-brimmed hat, subtly angled her phone toward the interaction, recording discreetly. Her friend beside her nudged her, whispering something inaudible but amused. The murmurs among the group grew louder, their interest now split between Nathaniel's lecture and Jonathan's poised responses. Jonathan met Nathaniel's gaze with a faint smile. "Narratives," he said, his voice steady, "are only as strong as their evidence. Wouldn't you agree?" The comment lingered in the air, sharp yet unassuming. A few group members exchanged glances, their curiosity piqued. Nathaniel's smirk faltered, and a flicker of irritation crossed his face before he forced another tight smile. "Indeed," Nathaniel said, his voice strained. "But let's not get sidetracked by interpretations. The manuscripts speak for themselves, unlike some modern narratives that require creative liberties." A louder chuckle rippled through the group this time, but it wasn't unanimous. A middle-aged man in a tweed jacket furrowed his brow, clearly uncomfortable with Nathaniel's pointed jabs. Jonathan chuckled softly, his expression unflinching. "The texts do have a way of enduring," he said, his tone almost playful. "Despite the passing fads of interpretation." The subtle jab landed, earning a few raised eyebrows and a faint murmur of approval. Nathaniel stiffened, his polished exterior cracking ever so slightly. "Shall we move on to the next exhibit?" Nathaniel said abruptly, his voice a touch too loud as he gestured toward the adjoining room. "We wouldn't want to linger too long on one perspective." As the group followed Nathaniel, Jonathan trailed behind, his calm composure contrasting sharply with the tension building in the room. The blonde woman with the phone whispered to her friend, her expression alight with intrigue. Behind them, a man muttered, "This is getting interesting." The chapter ended with the group stepping into the next room, the air thick with anticipation. Nathaniel's veneer of control was visibly slipping, while Jonathan's unshaken demeanor hinted at a growing dynamic shift. The subtle clicks of camera phones ensured that the scene wouldn't remain confined to the museum for long. The Renaissance gallery gleamed under bright spotlights, highlighting grand paintings and marble sculptures that stood as timeless tributes to human creativity. The tour group wandered among the masterpieces, Nathaniel's voice filling the space with an overly rehearsed enthusiasm. He gestured at a Botticelli, his tone dripping with performative authority. "And here, we see a perfect example of—" The sharp click of heels on the polished floor interrupted him. All heads turned as a poised woman in her 40s entered the gallery. She was impeccably dressed in a tailored gray suit, the hem of her pencil skirt brushing just above her knees, paired with sleek black heels that echoed with every step. Her auburn hair was neatly tied back into a chignon, and the museum badge pinned to her blazer identified her as Dr. Evelyn Hart, the curator of the exhibit. "Mr. Clark," she greeted, her voice warm and professional, cutting through the air like a bell. Her eyes held a mix of respect and familiarity as she approached Jonathan, who was examining a small bronze statue with quiet interest. Nathaniel froze mid-sentence, his confident posture faltering as his sharp brown eyes darted between Jonathan and Dr. Hart. The group's murmurs swelled with confusion. "You know him?" Nathaniel asked, his voice unsteady, the practiced smugness now replaced with a tentative disbelief. Dr. Hart turned toward Nathaniel, her calm smile unshaken. "Of course," she said, her tone carrying a subtle edge. "Mr. Clark is a distinguished historian and one of the consultants who helped curate this exhibit." A collective gasp rippled through the group, the weight of her words sinking in. Phones that had been filming Jonathan's stoic responses earlier now swung toward Nathaniel, whose smirk had vanished entirely. His face flushed crimson as his mouth opened and closed, searching for words. "Consultant?" he stammered. I had no idea." Jonathan turned to face Nathaniel, his calm smile widening just enough to be noticeable. His piercing blue eyes, steady and unflinching, seemed to hold the room captive. "Respect for history," Jonathan began, his tone even and measured. "Requires an open mind, Nathaniel." He let the words hang in the air for a moment before adding, "It also requires respect for people." The subtle jab landed like a thunderclap. The group fell silent, their gazes fixed on Nathaniel, who shifted uncomfortably under the weight of their scrutiny. His earlier bravado crumbled entirely, leaving him looking both awkward and exposed. Dr. Hart stepped closer to Jonathan, her expression one of unwavering professionalism. "Your insights were invaluable in shaping this exhibit," she said warmly. "I'm so pleased to see you here today." Jonathan inclined his head slightly, his faint smile never wavering. "It's always rewarding to see history come alive," he replied, his tone carrying a quiet satisfaction. Nathaniel, still rooted in place, tried to recover. I meant no disrespect," he mumbled, his words fumbling out clumsily. Jonathan's gaze remained on him, his calm demeanor unshaken. "Good intentions, Nathaniel," he said softly. "Don't erase the impact of poor behavior. Remember that." The gallery buzzed with murmurs, the tension thick but electric. Several group members whispered among themselves, their faces a mix of awe and amusement. A young woman holding her phone leaned toward her friend. "This is definitely going viral," she whispered, her screen capturing every second of the unfolding scene. The chapter ended with Jonathan stepping closer to the Botticelli, his interest returning to the art as if the moment had never happened. Dr. Hart stood beside him, offering a few quiet remarks about the piece. Behind them, Nathaniel lingered awkwardly, his confidence shattered, while the group began to view him with thinly veiled amusement and judgment. The air in the Renaissance gallery grew heavy with tension, the whispers of the group amplifying Nathaniel's discomfort. His face flushed deep crimson, his confident facade now a fragile mask. The group's murmurs were laced with judgment, their earlier amusement replaced with a sharper tone of disapproval. Dr. Hart, poised and authoritative, addressed Nathaniel directly. "We hold our staff to the highest standards of professionalism. Nathaniel," she said, her tone firm but composed. "It seems a refresher on respect and humility is long overdue." A middle-aged man in the group leaned toward his wife and muttered just loud enough, "Well, that explains a lot." The remark earned scattered chuckles, cutting through the tension like a blade. Nearby, the younger woman with the phone turned to her friend and whispered with a smirk, "This is going straight to TikTok." Nathaniel's shoulders slumped slightly, his usual upright posture collapsing under the weight of the moment. His dark curly hair seemed to cling awkwardly to his damp forehead as he stammered, I deeply regret my comments." His voice was barely audible, a stark contrast to his earlier pompous tones. Bowing his head slightly, he added, "I sincerely apologize." Jonathan, standing calm and collected, gave a gracious nod. His piercing blue eyes carried neither anger nor pity, only measured resolve. "Learning is part of growth," he said evenly, his voice carrying a quiet authority. "I trust you'll take this as an opportunity to improve." The group stood transfixed, their earlier discomfort giving way to admiration for Jonathan's composure. Dr. Hart, ever the professional, turned to the gathered visitors with a warm but commanding smile. "Let's continue the tour," she said, her tone lighter now. "Mr. Clark, if you'd like to share your insights, we would be honored." Jonathan's faint smile widened as he stepped forward, his polished brown shoes clicking softly against the floor. He gestured toward the gilded frame, housing a Renaissance painting, and began speaking with the ease of a true expert. His words wove stories of history and artistry, revealing fascinating details about the era that captivated the audience. His deep knowledge and eloquence turned the gallery into a classroom, his calm authority drawing even the most skeptical listeners into rapt attention. At the back of the group, Nathaniel stood silently, his earlier arrogance entirely drained. His sharp brown eyes followed Jonathan's gestures, his expression now one of quiet introspection. Even he couldn't help but be drawn into the historian's magnetic explanations, nodding subtly as Jonathan unraveled the complexities of the artwork. As the tour concluded, the group broke into spontaneous applause, their appreciation for Jonathan's insights and grace palpable. One man leaned forward and said, "This was the best part of the day. Thank you, Mr. Clark." Several others chimed in with similar sentiments, their enthusiasm contagious. Dr. Hart stepped forward once more, extending a hand to Jonathan. "Your contributions to this exhibit and to this moment have been invaluable," she said warmly. Her words carried a weight that made Nathaniel shift uncomfortably in the background. Jonathan shook her hand firmly, his expression as calm and steady as it had been throughout. "History," he said, his voice resonating with quiet strength, "is most impactful when it teaches us about ourselves." As the crowd began to disperse, a woman whispered to her companion, "I can't wait to post this. He's a class act." Her phone, still recording, caught Jonathan's final smile as he adjusted his iconic red MAGA hat and exited the gallery with effortless poise. Behind him, Nathaniel remained in the shadow of the room, his posture subdued but contemplative, his smirk replaced by an expression that hinted at genuine reflection. By morning, the internet was abuzz. Social media feeds were flooded with clips from the previous day, capturing the clash between Jonathan and Nathaniel. Headlines screamed, "Tour guide humbled, historian behind the hat," and "MAGA hat sparks museum lesson on respect." Comments poured in, praising Jonathan's grace under pressure and skewering Nathaniel's arrogance. Inside the museum, the atmosphere was tense but hopeful. The staff whispered as Nathaniel approached the curator's office, his usual confident stride replaced by cautious steps. His khaki pants were pressed, his polo shirt immaculate, but his demeanor was that of a man burdened by realization. Nathaniel spotted Jonathan in the central atrium, studying a small statue with quiet appreciation. Taking a deep breath, he crossed the polished floor. "Mr. Clark," he began, his voice steady but humble. "May I have a moment?" Jonathan turned, his piercing blue eyes meeting Nathaniel's with calm curiosity. His navy sweater and crisp white collar contrasted sharply with the bright red MAGA hat perched on his head, a symbol that had triggered so much controversy, yet remained steadfast. Nathaniel continued, his tone laced with genuine regret. "I want to apologize for my behavior yesterday. I let my biases cloud my judgment, and I disrespected both you and the role I'm supposed to uphold. Thank you for your patience. It was a lesson I sorely needed." Jonathan studied him for a moment, his expression thoughtful but kind. Then, with a faint smile, he extended a hand. "We all have lessons to learn," he said, his tone warm yet firm. "Respect for others is just as important as respect for history." Nathaniel shook his hand, the relief on his face palpable. Around them, a few staff members watched the interaction from a distance, nodding approvingly. One whispered, "That's how you own up to a mistake," while another added, "He's lucky Clark is such a class act." As Jonathan prepared to leave, his polished brown shoes clicking softly against the marble floor, something caught his eye near the entrance. A new plaque had been installed overnight. In bold letters, it read, "History teaches respect, a lesson for all of us." Jonathan chuckled softly, his faint smile widening. Adjusting his hat, he tipped it slightly in a gesture of acknowledgement. "A nice touch," he murmured to himself. Stepping out into the bright city streets, he disappeared into the bustling crowd, a figure of quiet authority and grace. Back inside, Nathaniel lingered by the plaque, his expression reflective, as if etching the words into his memory. The chapter closed with a young visitor snapping a picture of the plaque, posting it online with the caption, "History is more than artifacts, it's how we treat each other." Within minutes, the post gained thousands of likes, solidifying Jonathan's message as a timeless reminder for all.